are united, our voice is strong, and we got to continue to put pressure on the governor that we do not want to see fracking happening in New York State.
All right. Ban it now, not in New York, and not at the expense of poor people.
My name is Eric Weltman, and I'm with Food and Water Watch, a nonprofit consumer organization. Food and Water Watch is a member of New Yorkers Against Fracking, a statewide coalition that opposes fracking in New York. In just 1 year, New Yorkers Against Fracking has grown to over 200 coalition members, including health, labor, faith, environmental, community, and political organizations. We are joined by over 1,000 businesses, several hundred faith leaders, and allied networks of health professionals, students, and artists. We are united. We are united in opposing fracking in New York out of a conviction, grounded in science, that fracking is inherently dangerous and that it poses risks that cannot be adequately mitigated by regulation. Simply put, there is no safe fracking. There is no safe fracking. And we are motivated in part by the recognition of fracking's threats to New York City residents, to us, from cancer-causing radon in natural gas to climate-changing methane emissions, from risks to our precious drinking water to air pollution. We are joined today by some very crucial allies, extraordinarily crucial allies, our local elected officials. We are very grateful to have with us a set of citywide legislative and council elected officials whose support is essential to our cause. With that, I'd like to introduce Bill de Blasio, our public advocate.
Thank you very much, Eric. Thank you, Eric. Thank you to Food and Water Watch and New Yorkers Against Fracking. I want to thank all of my colleagues in government for their extraordinary advocacy on this issue. I want to particularly single out and thank Manhattan Borough President, I'm just going to accidentally say soon-to-be New York City Comptroller Scott Stringer. I didn't hear that. I didn't hear that. The visionary. I have to tell you, I want to just tell you a very quick vignette that I hope will say something to everyone here. I didn't, like most people, when fracking came along, you know, I didn't understand the nuances of it. And then I got one day a text from my daughter, Kiara, from her high school. And she had just seen the documentary Gasland. And she said, "Dad, you have to see this movie." And part of what struck me about it is she proceeded to say the same thing for the following 5 or 6 days until I stopped everything and watched the movie. And you cannot watch Gasland without being profoundly affected. That something is happening in this country that is a direct threat to our environment and particularly to our water supply. It is happening every day. When you see that documentary, you ask, how on earth did fracking get so far in this country without being stopped? Well, thank God in New York State we have a different attitude. And I know, you know, when you talk to folks in the environmental movement, let's be mature about the fact that there are different strains and different viewpoints, but everyone shares a common concern that one false move on fracking, one step too far, and you've lost a lot. You've poisoned the earth in a way that you might not be able to recover from, or it might take a long, long time to recover from. And so there has to be extreme caution, particularly when you see the history around the country. Now, we all agree the oil and gas industry has exerted extraordinary and unfair and inappropriate power in our country. Whether it's tax loopholes or whether it's the undercutting of the regulatory process that got them into fracking in so many states in the country in an obviously dangerous way. We cannot accept that pressure. It is our obligation as elected officials and activists to fight against it. And the place we need to begin is with the bill that I'm so happy the Assembly passed for a 2-year moratorium. This step must be taken now. This is the tangible thing before us. We must take this step. And we must convince the state Senate. And we all know a thing or two about the state Senate. First of all, recent events suggest it is not like the Roman Senate or other great bodies of old. There are some problems in the state Senate. But there's also a different problem than corruption. There's a problem of too much corporate power on display in the state Senate. There's too many cases where the state Senate defers to the business community instead of deferring to the people. So we have a real fight ahead. But the bottom line is, it is imperative in these next weeks that we pass this moratorium. If we fail, we are endangering the health of thousands and thousands of New Yorkers. We're endangering the future of our environment, and the eyes of the nation are on New York. We must pass this moratorium now. Thank you.
Scott Stringer, the Manhattan Borough President.
Thank you. Thank you, and I want to thank Eric and Food and Water Watch for bringing us all together today. And I want to start out by just taking a moment to think about how far this environmental movement has come. As Bill de Blasio said, years and years ago, this was not an issue on people's minds. If you asked people what fracking was, no one really understood what the ramifications were. It was an issue that environmentalists started to think about as we started to gather data from around this country, recognizing that corporate greed, willing to get underground to extract this natural gas, was polluting streams, blowing up homes, creating dangerous situations clear across the country. I was so intrigued by this that we did a report gathering all of the data from around the country and issuing a report to show, look, if this is what's happening in Texas, Pennsylvania, and other places around the country, imagine what would happen in our watershed in New York City, in New York State. The environmental damage that could be bestowed upon us would be simply an economic and environmental nightmare. In the last few years, we have created an environmental movement that cannot be turned back, that we will never accept these bad environmental protocols by rich corporations that seek to reap billions in profits at the expense of our planet, at the expense of our children. And the reason that we're here today is to remind everybody, and remind the powerful lobbyists in Albany, that this movement is growing. It's an electoral movement. People are voting on the basis of where you stand on fracking, and not just where you stand, but what are you doing in your community to make a difference. Woo! And I want to tell you something. There used to be meetings I would attend on fracking, and 10, 15 people would show up. And it was just the beginning. Today, you go to a meeting, hundreds of people are there. They're asking smart questions. They're asking not just about the watershed in downstate, but they want to know about streams and villages throughout the state of New York. Linda Rosenthal and Mark Ruffalo had an Upper West Side meeting, our West Side Assemblywoman. Hundreds of people came. You couldn't get into the room. Micah, that's true on the east side and throughout our boroughs. Tony Avella knows this as well. This is the #1 environmental issue. So I'm here to join with our elected officials to move our state officials that are not here today to pass a moratorium, to do the right thing, to not just do it in a way that is pro forma, voting and then walking away, but join this environmental movement, because it's absolutely true. If New York gets it right, then states across this country are going to get it right. And the people beyond our country will get it right. This is an international issue. We are not ready to drill. There are not safe protocols. Scientists have confirmed this. Advocates understand this. But more importantly, the people, parents, grandparents, understand that we want to leave this planet in much better shape for our children. And the way to do that is to stand down the oil and gas speculators who want to profit over our environment. We must not let that happen. Support the moratorium. Join this movement. There's no going back. Thank you very much. All right.
introduce State Senator Tony Avella.
You know, we're talking about how far this movement has come. I remember standing here on the steps of City Hall when I was a member of the City Council in 2009, asking then the state legislature to introduce a ban on hydrofracking. What has started with a very few people here in the City Council and City government and in the state has grown to be the largest grassroots effort on any one single issue in this state. People from every county, from every city, every municipality are standing up to say hydrofracking is the single most environmental disaster waiting to happen that this state has ever faced. We are going to win this battle against the oil and natural gas companies. The moratorium that has been passed by the Assembly, I've introduced the bill in the Senate. When we get back to the Senate, to the legislature next week, the Assembly was there this week, the Senate is coming back next week. This is going to be on the forefront of the Democratic Senate conference. We are not going to stop until we pass this moratorium. But it's only the beginning. We have to say to every New Yorker, wake up. If you're not involved in this issue, get involved. In New York City, we rely on our water from upstate. It is probably the best water in the entire country. We win awards every single year. Why? Why would we jeopardize that for a few dollars, for some few dollars of revenue, because most of the money will go to the oil and natural gas companies, and for a few temporary jobs? It is simply not worth it. It is simply a disaster waiting to happen. So I stand here with all my colleagues from city government, from state government, to say we're going to pass this moratorium and we're going to stop hydrofracking.
Thank you very much. Now my pleasure to introduce State Senator Jose Serrano.
Thank you. Thank you. I represent the 29th Senate District, which includes the South and West Bronx, East Harlem, Yorkville, Roosevelt Island, all of Central Park, and the Upper West Side. So it's a huge district geographic. The one thing that brings all these neighborhoods together is that we are united against hydrofracking. There is too much at stake. There is too much at risk. And if we get this wrong, the ramifications will be insurmountable, unfortunately. And I was just mentioning to my borough president, Scott Stringer, that the water in New York is so good right now that gallons, hundreds and thousands of gallons are shipped to other parts of the country so that people can make pizza and bagels that somehow taste as good as they do here in New York City. Now, will anyone want our water once we start fracking? And once we start polluting our water? No. And who wants a bagel from Boise? No one. So what I'm saying is that we have to think logically about this. Once we scramble the eggs, it's impossible to unscramble them. We have to make sure that we do not allow fracking in the state of New York. Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Linda Rosenthal.
And thank you, Food and Water Watch, and thank you, my colleagues. All of us are here united. We've stood here before, but as our borough president said, this movement is just growing and getting empowered and having huge impact. You know, when I first heard about the possibility that New York was going to go headlong into fracking, I was very suspicious. But as others have said, as we've learned more and more about this practice, and we've seen empirical evidence from states like Pennsylvania, I have become scared, petrified actually, that this kind of thing could happen in New York State. So I want to say uncategorically, for the record, that New York City says no to fracking.
Yeah.
It's no matter that fracking could take place in parts of upstate New York that some of us from the city have never heard of and will never even visit sometimes. In this case, there is no downstate, upstate divide, because this is about our environment. the environment of the state, the environment of the country. And this is something that I know my constituents have made loud and clear from the Upper West Side, Hell's Kitchen. When I had my fracking forum, hundreds upon hundreds of people streamed in because they were so eager to learn more, but also to voice their opposition. You know, we've been witness to some of the devastation that has been left in Pennsylvania, including harm to the water, harm to the soil, harm to the air, and harm to the animals. And we must not allow New York State to follow in these unfortunate footsteps. Fracking has the potential to render any land that people own useless and valueless. And when people say, well, I leased my land, I'm going to reap great benefits, they're mistaken. And they've been fooled by the gas and oil companies into signing away their land. They will never be able to sell that property because it will be despoiled by fracking. Economic recovery has been slow in New York State, especially in areas where fracking is likely to occur. So it does not make any sense to further threaten these economically fragile economies by rendering their land worthless. You know, the fact that we're even having this conversation before we're confident that fracking does not pose a health risk to people is absurd. I mean, that does not happen. In most cases, when tall buildings are put that are not as of right, environmental impact statements are required. Analysis of the impacts the new buildings will have on the surrounding community are a must. But with fracking somehow, it has, some people think it's okay to move forward without the scientific evidence we need to prove that no harm will be done, that we have technology that would mitigate that harm. None of that has occurred. Stakes are so high. We must have a careful conversation, and I'm so happy that the public is deeply engaged in this conversation. I was just going to chair the Science and Technology Commission. I intend to have conversations with experts, scientists, advocates, public health specialists to bring out more of the facts about the damage that fracking will do to our state if we let it proceed. But I am confident that this strong and united coalition will go forward, will prevail. We will triumph on this issue with our bills in the Assembly to ban fracking outright, as well as to have the moratorium, which we're going to enact first. So thank you for organizing this, and we'll keep marching on together.
Yeah.
Pleasure to introduce Assemblymember Danny O'Donnell.
Thank you very much. In 2009, I received a very disturbing phone call from my friend and colleague Barbara Lifton. And she told me we have to work to stop hydrofracking. I had no idea what it was. And so in late October of 2009, she and I were one of the only members from the Assembly who attended a hearing to try to figure out what it was. And what I learned that day was that we have more questions than we have answers. And you would have thought from 2009 to 2013 that by now we'd have answers, but we don't have answers. And so she and I strategized about how to get this to the forefront of the agenda of the Assembly. She brought the movie Gasland in to educate our colleagues, and we have worked hand in hand to fight to make sure that this never comes to be. She has authored bills, I have authored bills. One of the things that you don't think about is what happens to the water. Well, in some places, the wastewater is used to be thrown on roads to prevent snow and ice. We're trying to stop it and we're throwing on our roads. That's why I authored a bill that says that will be banned in the state of New York. In the last 4 years, Barbara and I have worked hand in hand as members of the Environment and Conservation Committee to make sure this issue does not go away. I've signed dozens of letters. I have co-sponsored dozens of pieces of legislation, and I can tell you that hydrofracking will not happen in the state of New York because of the leadership of the New York State Assembly. Thank you very much.
Introduce Assemblymember Micah Kellner.
Thank you, Eric. Proponents of hydrofracking keep telling us the economic benefits are going to be wonderful. But the problem is that we're going to end up paying a high price that New Yorkers just cannot afford. We've seen in Pennsylvania water on fire. In Ohio, when they've injected wastewater in the ground, suddenly there are earthquakes where there have never been earthquakes before. Soil has been contaminated. You know, we have a permit from the feds so that we don't have to filter New York City's water. The cost of building filtration plants for the city of New York would be billions upon billions of dollars. We've seen in Pennsylvania that it costs $500,000 to $800,000 to clean up each well after they're finished. We can't afford this. We can't afford hydrofracking. We can't afford to poison our water. It must be banned. We're starting in the State Assembly. The State Senate's got to finish the job, and the governor's got to hear us. This is just too dangerous.
Councilwoman Tish James.
Thank you. So this is just another example of profit over people. Another example of how you want to exploit poor farmers upstate.
Yep.
At the expense of a procedure which will threaten our water, threaten our environment, accelerate climate change, and put all of us at risk. I have seen in this city and in this nation how unfortunately poor people are exploited for a few meager pennies. And it's particularly concerning to me upstate, given their fragile economy. What we should do and what government should do, particularly the state government, is focus on an economic development policy in upstate New York that can sustain families and that does not put the rest of the state at risk. That's really the issue. And we should focus on the health needs and the environmental concerns that have been raised by this constituency and these advocates and the elected officials who stand with me here today. Those are the key issues, and that's why we need to see leadership. This is the time when all of us need to see leadership coming out of Albany, and leadership that represents the interests of the constituents who put people in office. And so I'm here today to join with this policy, here today to join with this coalition to say, ban fracking, ban it now, not in New York, and not at the expense of poor people. Thank you.
And now, Councilmember Steve Levin.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric. I want to thank Food and Water Watch. I want to thank the environmental community of New York City for coming out strong. This is an issue that has united New Yorkers. This is an issue that has brought us all together in our collective outrage to say, what are they thinking? What are they thinking? I serve on the environmental committee with Chairman Jim Gennaro, and a couple of years ago, we had a hearing about the potential impacts of fracking on the New York City water supply. I was asking Bloomberg administration officials, and they were proposing a wide berth along our water infrastructure coming down from the reservoirs upstate. And I asked them, what would be the cost if some of our water tunnels were to be ruptured, if some of our aqueducts were to be ruptured? What would be the cost in repairing that? And their response to me was, it is unrepairable. There is no cost because you can't fix it. We need to stay strong. I applaud the Assembly. I urge the Senate to take a stand and say, there are too many unknown, unanswerable questions. It would go too far. If we in New York State were to allow this to happen, irreparable, permanent damage would occur. The kind of damage that you can't fix. Even if you had trillions of dollars, you couldn't fix it. So we need to continue to stay strong as a community, stay together. You've done an incredible job. You have done an incredible job. You have done a historic job, and I applaud you. Let's stay strong. Thank you.
Let's introduce, just have 2 or 3 more speakers. Councilmember Margaret Chin.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, back in 2009, right after I won the primary, before I got into the city council, I joined with a group of students in Lower Manhattan. advocates to talk about fighting against fracking in New York State. And this is almost 4 years later, and we're still doing that. But we need to stand firm. And I want to thank the State Assembly for taking the leadership to push for moratorium and a ban. And we need the Senate, and we need Governor Cuomo to do the right thing, because our water are our most precious resource. We are not willing to take the risk, because once damage is done, it will never be fixed. So we gotta ban it now and stop it now. Thank you.
It's now my pleasure to introduce Councilmember Melissa Mark Viverito.
I want to thank everyone that is here, all the elected officials too that are standing strong. I'm just going to add my voice. I've always been opposed to fracking. We have to really put an end to this. The XL pipeline, any sort of these measures that can do irreparable harm. And there are successes that we can see. In my island, where I come from, Puerto Rico, we had a gas pipeline that was proposed for the island. That's right. And when the community came together and pushed back, that governor had to take back that decision, and that pipeline did not move forward. Woo! We have to do the same thing with the fracking issue, not only here for New York State, but for any other state that may have this challenge. We've seen the irreparable harm that it has done in other areas, so we already have the experience and we know the damage that can happen. So why we're going down that road, I don't understand. So we are united, our voice is strong, and we got to continue to put pressure on the governor that we do not want to see fracking happening in New York State.
Right. Councilmember Robert Jackson.
Well, first let me thank all of you for coming forward and saying that that we should ban hydrofracking in New York State. And in fact, I put forward a resolution supporting the Assembly bill and the Senate bill to ban hydrofracking. Bottom line is this: all you have to do is watch some of the video, loud and clear, where an individual opens the faucet and turns on the water and then puts a match to the water and whoosh. I mean, that's clear as day. If that doesn't show you from an example what occurs, and no one can guarantee us that our water system will remain safe and sound. Clearly, with the pressure, with the chemicals that are going into in order to release gases, all of those chemicals and all of the polluted water is going where? Going right into our system, poisoning all of us. So I hope that before this term ends, that we will have a vote on my resolution to ban hydrofracking in New York State, and also to support Assembly and the Senate bills that ban that. So I stand with all of you in saying ban it now, not later, not years from now. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, representing our Comptroller, John Liu, is Ari Huffner, the Deputy Comptroller for Public Affairs and Budget.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you all those here today standing and speaking out on this important issue. I have a brief statement I want to share with you from our Comptroller, John Liu, who, although not here physically, is certainly here in spirit. Companies involved with fracking will always say they're drilling with care, but we cannot take them at their word.
That's right.
That's why I filed a shareholder proposal at ExxonMobil on behalf of the New York City pension funds, demanding that they release data on what they are doing to safeguard the public and the environment from fracking. Their platitudes about keeping us and the environment safe are simply not enough. We want the cold, hard facts. We want to know how they are working to reduce the use of chemicals in fracturing fluids. We want to know what they're doing to reduce emissions. We want to know how much water they're using. We want to know about the community complaints they've gotten and whether they have been sufficiently addressed. And the list goes on and on. And that's just not what we want to know. We deserve to know the facts.
That's right.
It's simple and common sense. We should be able to assess the steps these companies are taking to reduce these risks. So to ExxonMobil and to all these other frackers who say they have the risks under control, we say, show us the fracking data. The comptroller will continue to work hard on behalf of the $134 billion New York City pension funds to make sure that companies do not poison our environment and bankrupt our future with their reckless fracking operations. Thank you, and thank you all who are speaking out on this important issue today.
Thank you. My name is Eric Weltman with Food and Water Watch. On behalf of New Yorkers Against Fracking, I want to thank you, and most importantly, I want to thank the elected officials and all of our supporters here today. If there's any questions, we'll take questions. Otherwise, have a good day.
The eyes of the nation are on New York. We must pass this moratorium now. Thank you.
Support the moratorium. Join this movement. There's no going back. Thank you very much.
And saying ban it now, not later, not years from now. Thank you.
The eyes of the nation are on New York. We must pass this moratorium now. Thank you.
Support the moratorium. Join this movement. There's no going back. Thank you very much.
And saying ban it now, not later, not years from now. Thank you.
The eyes of the nation are on New York. We must pass this moratorium now. Thank you.